Hello, I'm Paul Perrello, and welcome to the Philly Factor. There's a parcel of land that borders southwest Philadelphia and Yeadon, Delaware County, that time has apparently forgotten, except for a group of volunteers, dedicated volunteers, I may add, whose mission is not only to clean up this property, but restore it as well as the resting places of thousands of people who are interred at Mount Moriah Cemetery. Mount Moriah Cemetery is the final resting place for thousands of people, famous, perhaps not so famous, baseball players, entertainers, mayors, and many war veterans. It's estimated that more than 80,000 people are actually buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery. But in 2011, the city of Philadelphia was made aware, primarily through news reports and citizens' phone calls, that Mount Moriah had ended its business operations. With no one else really at the helm, the cemetery was overrun by weeds, brush, downed trees, illegal trash dumping, and conditions worsened. While there has been a movement to right what is a wrong in this portion of southwest Philadelphia and Yeadon, Delaware County, the deceased interred at Mount Moriah are looking for just respect, and a group of volunteers has come together to make sure that everyone that's buried there, as well as their families, get the respect that they rightfully deserve. Joining us here on the Philly Factor is Ken Smith. Ken is the treasurer of the Friends of Mount Moriah Cemetery to talk about his group's work, what is being done to preserve the property, and what we might be able to do to help. So Ken, I'm going to thank you for spending some time to talk to us about your organization and the work that they're doing, all of the volunteers doing to restore this cemetery. A lot of people may not be familiar where exactly Mount Moriah sits. As I said, it borders Cobbs Creek Parkway, I believe, and half of it is on the city side and the other half is in Yeadon, Delaware County.
Exactly. It's in southwest Philadelphia. The main entrance is on the 6200 block of King Sessing.
So some people probably drive by there every day and they realize that it's a graveyard, a cemetery, but they may not know a little bit of the history behind Mount Moriah. So this is a cemetery that dates back to the 1800s?
1855 it opened.
Yeah. And it was, the primary use for the cemetery was, churches in the city. They were running out of places to bury parishioners, so they opened a cemetery, not the churches, but a cemetery opened in this part of the city for people to be buried.
Yeah, that was part of the original business plan for Mount Moriah Cemetery. It was a garden cemetery, so as the city expanded, they needed a larger cemetery, and that was certainly part of it. As the city grew, some of the churches were closing in the city, and they needed a place to go ahead and reinter the churchyard.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you say a garden cemetery, to look at Mount Moriah today, generally speaking, it is really not a garden. I sort of gave the description here at the beginning that it's overrun by brush and weeds and downed trees and toppled gravestones, and it, in some cases has become an illegal dump for people to dump their trash.
A lot of that was true back in 2011. As far as still being a place where people are dumping on a regular basis, that doesn't occur.
Okay.
Or I should say, it occurs a lot less frequently. When we walk through, first off, it's important to understand the size of Mount Moriah. Mm-hmm. Mount Moriah, when it first opened, was about 40 acres. It expanded about 380 acres. Right now, we believe it's right around 200 acres. To give everybody kind of like a sense of what's 200 acres, it's a number until you try to, wrap your head around that. The easiest way to describe it is Citizens Bank Park is 21 acres.
Okay.
So we can put 10 of those baseball fields in Mount Moriah. And from a cemetery standpoint, it's a lot different than what you would imagine your typical modern cemetery these days. Modern cemeteries these days, all the headstones are in line. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of order to it. Mount Moriah obviously is not. It was designed to have kind of like winding roads, and it certainly had a lot of character and still does have a lot of character to itself. But from the standpoint of being a kind of like what you would envision a modern cemetery, it's certainly not that.
So what happened then? I mean, here we had this cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
2011 rolls around, and the news media, is alerted to the fact that they've ceased operations. The cemetery, the
Right.
business people behind the cemetery. You have this jurisdiction that is part Philadelphia, part Yaden, Delaware County. So what happened?
It's a complex situation that we're dealing with right now. Obviously, with the cemetery being open in 1855, closing in 2011, there's a lot of history in there.
Sure.
Cemeteries operate through or receive funding through mainly two ways: selling plots, which Mount Moriah doesn't do at the present time, and they work off the dividends and interests from their perpetual care fund. At this point, we can't find it. So it was a cemetery, unfortunately, is a business. And the business lasted from, again, pre-Civil War to modern times. During that time frame, there have been banks that have gone out of business, and I'm talking about, and the depressions,
Sure.
the stock market crashes. The perpetual care funds may have been invested in those vehicles to where they completely get wiped out. So with the cemetery not being able to go ahead and sell plots, not being able to go ahead and collect dividends and interest off a perpetual care account that doesn't exist, they weren't able to go ahead and care for the grounds. Is it possible that somebody was in there dipping into the perpetual care funds? Certainly is. We just can't prove it at this point because of it could have been several decades of neglect and people dipping into the funds. But with that being said, with a drop of funding comes not being able to invest in capital improvements in a cemetery: roads, drainage, fencing, repair work on the gatehouses and whatnot. So as funding dried up, they simply cared for what they needed to, and those were the newer parts of the cemetery where they may have been able to go ahead and sell a couple of plots. And this neglect is not just 5 years. We're talking decades. There are some places in the cemetery where it has gone from being grass, like what you would envision as grass or a cemetery, to completely wooded. And that takes decades to occur. So as funding dried up, the area that they cared for just shrank and shrank.
So your group comes together then. It's a nonprofit organization whose mission is to try to restore, and it's a long project. I mean, this is not going to happen overnight.
Right.
But we talked before we started here that there are hundreds of volunteers across the country, although there are a handful, maybe a dozen or two, that may be out at the cemetery on any given day, working, even just mowing the lawn, cutting the grass, trimming the trees or the weeds around the headstones. But the mission then, the primary mission then of the group is to, because a lot of people might say, well, what is it exactly that the Friends of Mount Moriah, what is it that you want to do?
We want to preserve the grounds, we want to restore the grounds, and then we also want to educate people on the history of Mount Moriah and the people who are interred there.
You mentioned before we started taping that there are a number of military that are buried there at Mount Moriah, and there are 2 military cemeteries there on the ground of Mount Moriah?
Correct.
Okay. And they're funded through the Veterans Administration. And so it shows you that that not all has been abandoned or was abandoned there at Mount Moriah, but the VA is only going to take care of those graves where the military dead are interred.
Correct.
But is there any? Do you find that some of the volunteers that are working with your organization have direct connections with people that are interred at Mount Moriah? So a family that may have have loved ones there, they've seen the conditions and they decided that they didn't want their loved ones to be interred in a cemetery where the grass is not grass but are weeds. Have they gotten involved in the organization?
Yes, we have several active members whose loved ones are interred at the cemetery. Our president, Paulette Roan, her husband is interred out there. That was her initial connection to the cemetery. We have another gentleman whose loved one is interred in the Naval Asylum. That's another one of the national cemeteries within Mount Moriah. We have several who, see what the conditions are and they just want to get involved.
We talked a little bit about your backstory, how you got involved in the Friends of Mount Moriah. And you don't necessarily have to be have a connection, direct connection to Mount Moriah to be involved. And you talked about a friend of yours was involved, and through social media, that's what got you hooked to help out in the mission of restoring Mount Moriah.
Exactly. Yeah, I reconnected with a childhood friend who was out there one of the first days, and this was when everything was just completely a mess. So I simply reached out to him, can I help? And 5 years later, I'm out there almost every day.
Yeah. Given your tenure now as treasurer of the organization, as a volunteer, from the minute you first stepped onto the grounds of the cemetery to where we are now, how would you describe the transformation from back then and to where we are today?
Right now we control, well, when we walk through the entrance in 2011, we controlled literally none of the cemetery. And that was, it ranged everything from high grass to, again, dense forest. We're up to maintaining about 40 to 45% of the cemetery, and that's cutting back and regularly maintaining those areas.
Is there any assistance, be it financial or just ground support from either the city, because part of the property sits in the city and the other part sits in Yaden, Delaware County? Look, everybody is cash strapped these days, so whether it's the city or Delaware County, but is there any assistance from either one of those entities in helping you in your mission?
We do receive some, but what's important to note is probably the average donation that we get is from the family of a loved one who is hasn't been able to go out to the cemetery because of they're kind of worried where the cemetery is, the conditions and whatnot. But again, it's our average donation is going to run about maybe $30 to $50 coming from a family who's just sees exactly what we're doing on a regular basis, caring for the cemetery and just taking it back, one inch at a time, 1 foot at a time.
Yeah. You're not necessarily looking, or maybe you are, you're not necessarily looking for someone to come out on a Saturday morning with their weed whacker or their lawnmower to help you in your mission, but you talk about donations. That has got to be vital, whether it's $1, $10, or $30. So how can we help? I mean, we're getting the word out about Mount Moriah and how people might be able to help you in your mission. So financial support is desperately needed. But you have volunteer days, events that people can come out with their weed whacker or their lawnmower and help you in clearing some of the grass that's out there.
Sure. On a typical year, we'll have anywhere between 10 to 15 cleanup events. We advertise on those on our website, the Friends of Mount Moriah, and the turnout could be as small as 15 people may show up. We may have 200 show up. It depends on the organization that's going to be participating that day. We've had LaSalle University come out. We've had Villanova, Temple. We're getting a lot of active involvement in the community wanting to come out and lend us a hand. So beyond financial support, raising awareness of what we're dealing with.
Sure.
It's really hard to kind of sit here and give everybody kind of a picture of exactly what we're dealing with. Again, the size of the cemetery, 200 acres, the conditions. There's times when we're pulling headstones completely out of the ground. I mean, completely covered, and we're doing this, on not even a shoestring budget. In order to go ahead and manage and maintain a cemetery of our size, not dealing with capital improvements, only dealing with the cost of maintenance, it would be between $300,000 to $500,000 a year, and we're getting by with about 50,000.
We put the website up on the screen, so people, if they're interested in donating, money to the Friends of Mount Moriah, you could do so. If you're interested in some of the volunteer opportunities to present themselves, you could go through the website. We talked at the beginning of the program about 80,000 people buried there. I guess that's really, with the records not readily available, that's the number that has been floated out there with 80,000 interments. Anybody of note that might be buried there?
A lot of the people who are of note were interred back during kind of like the Civil War era when the cemetery was first founded. Any of the people who would be the names that I would mention now, like John McCullough, he was a Victorian Shakespearean actor, traveled the world. We have magicians, we had politicians, we had, you know, all walks of life. This was kind of like very similar to Laurel Hill.
Absolutely. So, has there been an aha moment for you or any of the other volunteers where you're out there working, and whether it's, you know, with a lawnmower or, you know, with the weed whacker or with a set of shears to cut back some of the brush, something that you found or something that appears that would have been lost? I mean, if a group like yours did not exist and really got intimately involved in restoring and maintaining the grounds there, this probably would have all been lost too. It just would have been overrun. But has there been anything that stands out in your mind or in the mind of the organization that was a significant find, something that no one would have known unless some volunteer out there would have stumbled upon it?
Oh, it's an interesting question. We are coming across Medal of Honor recipients
Really?
who have been lost to history. We have a gentleman on our staff by the name of Sam Ricks, who has gone through the Naval Asylum, and what is so incredible with what he has done has been in the Naval Asylum. And the Naval Asylum is our version of Arlington, to where you have all the headstones, which are lined up perfectly,
Right.
very well maintained. The headstones themselves are over 100 years old, and they're made out of white marble. Over the years of just rain hitting them, the names start to wash away. What Sam has done has gone through the records, used several tricks, you know, reflecting light, to go ahead and bring the identity back to these sailors and Marines. And to me, that's an incredible thing to simply be a part of. That's one example. Aha moments to me are when I'm with a family and you're able to go ahead and find their loved one. I mean, it doesn't get any more personal than that. Being able to go ahead and help them make that connection, going out. Now, whether they knew them or not, whether they simply reconnected or discovered this ancestor through Ancestry.com, or if you're out there with somebody who is looking for their father, looking for their grandfather. It's an amazing thing to be a part of when that connection occurs.
And chances are, and I think we mentioned before we started the program, is that many of the records that one would assume that a cemetery office would have maintained and would have under lock and key, they've all been relocated just for security. So when, you know, someone comes there saying, you know, I'm looking for my father or my mother, and I believe they might be buried here, that's got to be sort of a difficult mission, because unless they have the deed, and even if they have the deed, trying to navigate this property can be a challenge.
It certainly is. A couple of the a couple of the data points that we have there was a spreadsheet that was created that we're able to go ahead and access loved ones' locations within the cemetery. That's one thing. But as far as paper records going all the way back to when the cemetery first opened in 1855, you're right, when the cemetery closed, there were, you know, just boxes and boxes just filled and shipped off to storage. Now, that's not the only way that we can go ahead and find out where loved ones are located, or as well as the history of these loved ones. We have volunteers who will be on just basically our Facebook page. A prime example is a friend of mine who is out there volunteering on a regular basis now. I was able to go ahead and find his family plot to kind of help him learn about his family history. I took a picture of the headstone. It listed who was interred there, and I threw it up on our Facebook page. And within 2 hours, he had probably 4 photographs, the biographies of the people, and we just have so many people who are willing to go ahead and dig in and give people like the connection to their past.
Yeah. You know, oftentimes we think of cemeteries as final resting place, which it is. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's a place where you know, and you know your family perhaps will wind up when you're called by your maker. But you know, just to take a stroll through any cemetery is a lesson in architecture, lesson in art. It's a lesson in history. I mean, you know, given what you said, is that you can, because the internet has made it so easy. You can, whether you know there's a loved one there or not, you may just stumble upon a name that sounds familiar, may not sound familiar, but you might be intrigued because you read the headstone. Back in the day, headstones were very ornate, and not that they gave a whole history of what the person was about, but they gave a little more information than what you would typically see on a headstone today. So that might, spark interest for someone to do a search further about who is this person that is interred at Mount Moriah. Yeah,
Most definitely.
And so we talked at the beginning, you said that it is a secured property now. Does that mean, and we talked basically that people aren't going to be going there and hauling their trash, and dumping tires there or whatever. So what type of security is in place? I mean, it is a cemetery, it is an open area. It is probably difficult to maintain the security of 280 acres, I think you mentioned. So is the area secure? And I know secure is a relative word.
It is a relative term. When we first went in, the front fence of Mount Moriah on the Philadelphia side was, completely in shambles. So a lot of that has been repaired. We do have volunteers. We do our best to go ahead and lock the gates at night to go ahead and prevent any illegal dumping. But understanding that it's not a regular paid staff to where we're there from 9 to 5 every day to where someone is actually locking the gate. So that's presented us a little bit of a challenge. We're tested from time to time with the people who want to come in and unfortunately dump. But we have a lot of incredible volunteers who are, once it happens, it gets picked right up.
Yeah, that's important. I know, there are so many volunteers to mention and talk about and to recognize, but I know there's been a lot of work by some of the members of the business community, especially when it comes to restoring some of the headstones of our military dead, that they have come in and they have, and as you said, they come in with the big toys. They're not playing around.
Right.
They're coming in and they're doing the job to restore the final resting places for some of the people that have been buried there.
Yeah, just recently we had a company come out, Phillips Restoration, came out with, it was effectively a 4x4 forklift. And these guys know exactly what they're doing. I mean, they're lifting stones that are 1,000 pounds and plus very carefully and putting them back how they should be. I mean, the last thing that we're going to do is try to go ahead and write something of that size.
Sure.
Because the last thing we want to do is to create a potential danger.
Yep. This work has got to be very gratifying for you and all the volunteers because you are making a difference. And whether it is, cleaning up leaves in the fall or making sure that the grass is maintained in the spring and the summer. So what's it like for you personally to be involved with the organization, Friends of Mount Moriah? And what is it that you personally get out of this mission that you're involved in?
It's a good question. It probably has to be one of the most fulfilling experiences that I've had. Nobody gets paid out there. Just being with a group of people who are rolling their sleeves up and trying to fix what's wrong on a regular basis, not going out there one Saturday and saying that's it. I mean, this is like a whole community that's pulled together to try to go ahead and again fix things, help people who want to visit their family's grave, because it's not just ground, it's where people's families are interred. So it's a very deep and moving thing for a family member to witness that things are what they thought was in Southwest Philadelphia. It was being dumped on all the time, and whenever they thought about it, it's grief. Now it's coming back. To be a part of that is amazing. And don't get me wrong, at this point of the year, when we've been cutting the grass since March, There's a lot of exhaustion in the volunteers' faces, and we're very thrilled to see the frost come through. This is kind of like our summer, but to cap off the end of the year, we have this incredible event. We participate in the Reefs across America, which is where we're going to have over 1,200 wreaths that were sponsored by donors to go ahead and place on the veterans' graves, and that's the end of the year for us.
Yeah, and that's a fitting tribute for the members of our military. And we're talking about not just contemporary members who served in World War II, the Vietnam War. I mean, we're talking about back to the Civil War people.
We have people interred at Mount Moriah who go all the way back to the Revolution.
The Revolution, wow, whose history otherwise, whose connection to not only Philadelphia, but the birth of our country is right there at Mount Moriah.
Right, how can you not try?
Yeah.
It's very hard for a lot of the volunteers to leave at night. Just because you're trying to claw back the ground, and it's not just a matter of clearing it one time. You have to be able to clear it and maintain it, because nothing is more, nobody wants to give back what it took so hard to go ahead and scratch away and claim.
I want to thank you, Ken, for being with us here on the program. It was the past half hour. And again, you can check out the website. You can learn more information there. More importantly, if this sounds like something that you want to get involved in and volunteer your time, maybe it's only one weekend, 2 weekends out of the year, your efforts will go a long way to helping the Friends of Mount Moriah. So until next time, I want to thank you for being with us here on the program. My name is Paul Perrello, and thanks so much for watching the Philly Factor.